Earring complete military camouflage, 17-year-old Zoe Chen alighted from the school bus, her combat boots resonating against the concrete, while rumors spread like wildfire all around her. The morning the parking lot of Lincoln High was covered in lengthy shadows from the sun. However, nothing could console the steps that were following her everywhere. Is she really going to homecoming week wearing that? Torres Madison, the president of the student body, sporting a flawlessly styled blonde hairstyle and fancy accessories, burst out laughing, enough to be heard by half the parking lot. That tone was in her voice, of incredulity combined with a sense of superiority that only those who had never doubted their position in the social order. In a matter of minutes, phones were released, and images of Zoe were immediately making the rounds on social media. The captions arrived quickly and brutally. Dressing up like a wannabe soldier girl is insomnia and is experiencing an identity problem until Friday. Zoe could almost sense the alerts crashing across the school's unseen network as she, from phone to phone, the image spread. Her shame increased with each portion. Her mouth clenched as chestroled by a bunch of football players, their lettermen, jackets shining, who had congregated close to their raised vehicles early in the morning. The quarterback, Jake Morrison, whose ego apparently exceeded his already significant tram, pushed his companions and began to march in a disproportionate line behind them. Her, in a mocking drill sergeant, he yelled, "Left, right, left, right." "Speaking tenet, we've got a real soldier here, boys," as his friends gave a theatrically accurate salute. The ensuing laughing pricked Zoe's skin, but she continued to walk with her eyes and spine straight ahead. She had long since discovered that displaying vulnerability simply made everything worse. On her petite body, a baggy camouflage jacket, draped loosely, a sleeve rolled up to show hands that, in spite of her apparent calmness, trembled a little. The tiniest scent was still present in the fabric fragrance of her father's perfume, a fact that made her feel both reassured and heartbroken each time she wore it. She moved barely 2 months earlier, when her mother wedded Robert, quiet but sweet man who worked at Lincoln High Insurance. It had been an essential step. Her mother found it unbearable to remain in their little village where every corner reminiscent of David Chen, however. Beginning anew at a different school in senior year was similar to attempting to join a midway through the film. Everyone was already aware of their groups, roles, and position inside the meticulously crafted social environment, so he had hoped for just this kind of attention. Stay away. She had intended to blend in, graduate inconspicuously, and proceed on college, where she might make a new beginning. However, today wasn't about being accepted, or negotiating the perilous waters of high school politics, or even forming friendships. Today was the 3rd anniversary of the worst day of her life, and the one. A ritual that allowed her to feel near to her father was to wear his uniform. The crushing weight of his absence was lessened by that. A dot. As she got closer to the main structure, more pupils started to observe her peculiar clothing. Discussions halted in the middle of sentences as people swiveled to follow her. While some murmured beneath cupped hands, others pointed outright. A group of theater children at the entrance to the drama department began an unplanned performance, acting as though they were ducking for cover and incoming. They yelled theatrically. Even the generally unconcerned seniors, who often didn't care to see freshmen, were taking out their phones to record what they were obviously amused by the morning's events. The hallway with the highest volume of traffic was where Zoe's locker was situated. School. Due to a sad turn of events, she had to endure a trial of judgment every day. When she arrived her heart fell as she saw the familiar blue metal door. There was already someone there. Ahead of her, the locker had a handwritten message affixed to it. G.I. Jane's desired words. The focus moved over the notebook paper in a heavy black marker. The handwriting was purposefully disorganized in order to conceal the author's identity, but the brutality was obvious. The message was torn by her as students continued to flow past, many slowing down. She crumpled it in her fist with more force than was required. Their speed to catch. A better glimpse of the camouflaged girl who had miraculously emerged as the morning star. She tried to open her combination lock with sweaty palms, but the numbers were a little fuzzy. The corners of her eyes were on the verge of tears. Behind her, someone said, "Nice costume." In her pay history class, Zoe turned to see Ashley Kim, a girl who hotaways appeared to be somewhat normal in comparison to the people that are hooked with social media. However, there was even a hint of confused amusement in Ashley's voice, as though Zoe were a riddle she was unable to fully explain. Is this for a project of some sort or something? At last, Zoe opened her locker, and with precise and robotic movements, she started bringing out her books for first period. That kind of thing, she not believing she could say anything more without. Her voice breaking, she answered softly. The to tell someone the truth was too difficult, too painful, and too intimate, who was practically unknown. When the first bell rung and pupils grudgingly started to move towards classrooms, Zoe noticed her image in the tiny mirror she had mounted within her locker door. The dog tags that belonged to her father were concealed under Thea's vintage uniform shirt collar. She could practically see him in the reflection, with his hand on her shoulder. And his words encouraging her to be proud and stand strong, he stood behind her. However, as she blinked, only the busy corridor and the weight of 100 inquisitive steps were present. By the third quarter, the harassment had changed from lighthearted jeering to something more calm and purposeful. The chemistry between Zoe, usually class, was her haven. A place where formulas and equations offered rational, understandable solutions in a world that frequently lacked logic. However, even the scientific sanctuary was unable to defend her from the escalating attention storm. Her uniform had drawn attention. She moved into an attempt to fit in. She sat towards the back of the classroom as usual. Tyler Brooks, however, had other plans. Tyler was the type of learner who flourished on disorder, a class clown whose frequently humor veered into cruelty. He had spent the entire morning observing Zoe in anticipation of the ideal opportunity to strike. And the perfect platform for his act was given by chemistry class. As Mrs. Patterson started using the whiteboard to describe molecular structures, Tyler took the initiative, got to his feet, suddenly saying he had to sharpen his pencil. He chose a purposefully cautious path that led him right in front of Zoe's desk. With dramatic accuracy, he unintentionalist his arm across the floor, knocking her pencil case, notepad, and textbook on the ground. "Oops," he said loudly, with a fake innocence in his voice. "I apologize for that, ... His sound effects were excessive. Explosion. Boom. Kaboom. With a motion frantically with his hands, simulating the mayhem of combat. The moment Wassadell, Mrs. Patterson was writing formulas on the board with her back to the viewer, utterly unaware of the drama playing out behind her. The class burst into uncontrollably loud laughter. Students, their shoulders trembled with stifled laughter as they put their palms over their mouths. Some weren't even making an effort to. They openly point and whisper to their neighbors, revealing their delight. Zosis, she stooped to gather her strewn about possessions, her face burned with embarrassment. Her dad's enormous leaves, making the easy task difficult and unpleasant. "Careful there, soldier." Tyler bent over and whispered, feigning assistance, but actually making matters worse by kicking her. "A pencil I wouldn't want you to call in an airstrike on the chemistry lab," he said loudly, further under the desk. Another round of snickers echoed through the classroom, loud enough for the stacked pupils around them to hear. "Sus." She straightened up, her palms tightened into fists, her knuckles broad against the faded green fabric of her dad's outfit. Her instincts begged her to defend herself and fight back. Herself, in order to hold Tyler accountable for his brutality. However, she had long before discovered that retaliation just served to worsen the situation and provide bullies with more tools to target her. Thus she remained silent, just went back to her seat, and attempted to concentrate on the chemical bonds lesson Mrs. Patterson was teaching. But the words seemed to drift aimlessly through the atmosphere. Throughout the time, there was a persistent undercurrent of whispering gasment and conjecture. What is the reason behind her attire? Could she be attempting to appear edgy? Perhaps she's experiencing some sort of disintegration. Every remark seemed like a tiny wound. Additionally, Zoe felt as though she was bleeding by the time the bell sounded. From 1,000 little cuts. There was no respite during lunch. The cafeteria was, on the best of days, a social minefield. but today it seemed like strolling Jinto, a hostile area. After grabbing a tray, Zoe proceeded to the lunch queue. Keenly conscious of the steps and the murmurs that followed her around, the mealwomen looked at her with curiosity but remained silent, though she saw one of them pointing at her and nudging another. Guidance. In the cafeteria's far corner, she discovered an empty table, as far away from the popular kids area as feasible. There were advantages and disadvantages to the seclusion. It kept her safe, avoiding face-to-face conflict, but also made her a clearer target. Alone in a Cherez, a ray of uniqueness amid a sea of conformity when wearing her military uniform for a few precious minutes. She hoped she would survive lunch, trying to avoid the occasional outburst of laughter from others around her. She chose her sandwich without truly tasting it. She knew that the tables were aimed at her. Her article, however, didn't last long. Madison Torres showed up at her table like a well-groomed storm cloud, with her typical group of supporters on either side. Walsh, Britannia, and Chloe Martinez were standing just behind their leader, their faces displaying a mix of interest and just covert brutality. The social structure at Lincoln High was dominated by these girls, wearing fancy gloves over their iron fists, and they had evidently determined that Zoe's outfit posed a threat to their power. Madison started off by saying, "Look, military girl," with a specific tone of phony worry that popular girls had mastered over many generations, uninvited. She slid into the seat across from Zoe, her expertly applied cosmetics and thoughtfully arranged hairstyle layer in sharp contrast to Zoe's plain ponytail and naked face. "We understand that this whole costume thing is getting stale, whether you're trying to be edgy or something." The nearby cafeteria had started to go silent. Students sensed drama brewing, and conversations were dying. Telephona seemed, as though by magic, held inconspicuously, yet poised to seize whatever was about to happen. This was superior to reality television. Everyone wanted a front row seat in this high school conflict that was happening in real time. Perhaps instead of purchasing at Army Surplus, try shopping at other stores. Brittany also said with a sound. Like glass shattering, he laughed. "There's so many adorable shops in the city. We could definitely go shopping with you sometime." The proposal was given with such blatant insincerity that it seemed more offensive than invitation. Chloe gave an enthusiastic nod, her voice adopting a condescending tone, giving a youngster an explanation. "Yes, as if we're not attempting to be cruel or anything, but you seem to be unsettling everyone. You seem to be making an excessive effort to be unique, you understand." Zoe's knuckles turned white as her grasp tightened over her plastic fork. The cafeteria was nearly empty, utterly quiet now. Like spectators, hundreds of eyes were fixed on their table in a gladiatorial contest. The weight of their collective judgment was palpable to her. The students who smelt blood in the water were eagerly awaiting it. Slowly she got up, scratching her chair, with a sound that seemed to reverberate in the abrupt hush as it struck the linoleum floor. The motion was intentional, controlled. But there was a fire in her eyes that caused Madison's self-assured smile to waver a little. "You're clueless." "What you're talking about," Zoe answered, her tone steady but with a hint of danger. Madison grinned again, encouraged by the statement, something that suggested depths these girls couldn't begin to fathom. Both her own sense of social superiority and her audience, she reclined in her seat with the haughtiness of someone who has never really been held accountable for her brutality. She said, "Oh, please," her to make sure everyone in the cafeteria could hear. The voice rose. "What are you going to do? Make a call to your father?" The words struck Zoe like a physical blow, and for a brief instant that seemed to last forever. The whole it appeared as though the cafeteria held its breath. Zoe had just opened her mouth to reply, when her mouth opening to speak would either reveal the truth she'd been hiding or entirely destroy her, weighing heavily on her chest. A sound that was not found at Lincoln High never encountered broke the uneasy silence. It began as a faint rumble in the distance, beneath the fluorescent buzz of the restaurant. But in a matter of seconds it rose into a thunderous scream that seemed to rock thievery pillars of the structure. The windows of the cafe shook wildly in their frames, making a number of kids automatically hide behind their desks. Trays of lunch clattered to Theffler as the roaring sound became more intense and louder, until it seemed as though it was coming from inside each person's chest. Madison looked around, and her self-assured grin disappeared. Her flawlessly coiffed hair was flying in all directions, swirling around her face as she attempted to find the source of the deafening sound. "What the hell is that?" Tyler asked Dot over. "The den," Brooks yelled, but his voice could hardly be heard over the mechanical noise that now filled ever another sound. Somewhere in the kitchen, the ceiling lights flickered menacingly. Plates fell to the ground as through the vast windows that lined the building. The whole structure appeared to vibrate with growing intensity. The east wall of the cafeteria. A huge shadow moved across the sky, obscuring, letting the room briefly become dark in the afternoon sun. Students' faces were jammed up to their glass, with phones already out and recording a scene straight out of a war film instead. High schools in the suburbs appeared above them, airs being stirred by the rotors of a Black Hawk chopper. Like something from another planet, a visible maelstrom emerged over the school. The plane was huge. It circled the building with military accuracy, its olive-green hull shining in the sunlight. The unique whiff its rotors produced a rhythm that appeared to correspond with the heartbeats of all those observing from below. Someone murmured, "Holy," but the words were drowned out by the deafening din. "Is that real?" The chopper circled Lincoln high once before making a quick turn to head for the football pitch, as hundreds of youngsters hurried by. Many carelessly left their lunches behind, causing chairs to scrape and tumble towards the exits and windows. Teachers made a valiant effort to keep things somewhat organized, but even they were squeezing their necks and taking out their phones to record the extraordinary view outside. Everyone maintains their composure. It was difficult to hear Mrs. Patterson's voice as she attempted to manage to control her kids, but as she saw the military planes fly down towards the 50 yards out, "Please don't move from your seats." However, her words were ignored. As students rushed for the exits in a desperate attempt to escape, the cafeteria had descended into controlled mayhem. Step outside and observe the action on the football pitch. Madison and her team were carried away by the crowd. Her former assurance was gone, replaced by uncertainty and a mounting feeling that they had fallen into something much more significant than a straightforward altercation over lunch. Zoe stayed motionless at her table, observing the chopper as it landed on the football pitch through the glass with worked-on accuracy. Her hands trembled as her heart pounded so fiercely that she could feel it in her throat. It became apparent. She was familiar with the aircraft and the painted unit markings on its side, understood exactly what it meant and why it was here. The helicopter's engines started to slow down, but the rotors kept turning as people dressed in military garb appeared from the aeroplanes. Zoe could see the clean lines of their formal dress even from a distance. The sheen of polished ribbons and brass that conveyed tales of sacrifice and service. A gulp of air in her throat as she identified a towering, commanding figure with silver hair entering the field, showing through her military headgear. Sarah Mitchell, colonel her father 3 years ago. Zoe's life was permanently altered by the news she received from her previous commanding officer over the intercom system. Principal Williams' voice broke through the ecstatic chit-chat and conjecture that crowded the corridors. His normally composed expression changed to one of barely contained awe as he made an announcement that would live on long after the day of graduation. His voice boomed, "Students and faculty, pay attention." Through the structure, battling the chopper rotors outside that were still spinning, we are in a unique circumstance. Growing on our campus, please come to the main office, Zoe Chen. Right away, Zoe. Chen to the main office, I say again. The news reached Thel like an electric shock to the crowd. Hundreds of people looked in Zoe's direction, still in the cafe, standing stationary. Suddenly, she felt that her father's huge uniform was too enormous, and simultaneously too small. The rumors began right away and quickly spread. It spreads like wildfire across the audience. Chen Zoe, who is that? The young woman in the military clothing. How did she act? Is she having problems? What is the military's purpose here? Her, Madison, had a pallid face, her former confidence dissipating as the situation's ramifications started to become clear. the young woman she had been making fun off the object of her cruelty. There was some connection between the jokes about calling her daddy. It's the military chopper that had just touched down on the football pitch at their school. Tyler Brooks appeared, as though he might be ill. His face turned a putrid green ash, became aware that his jokes about explosions and military sound effects might have been aimed at someone with real military ties. A dot. As Zoe started to make her way to the main office, the crowd opened up in front of her like the Red Sea, minutes ago. The students had been making fun of her, but now they were watching in startled quiet, their phones documenting each moment of her trip through Theckeriders. Against the linoleum, the combat boots that had seemed so out of place that morning now had a different sound. Floor, not clumsy or attention-grabbing, but meaningful and with a purpose. Instructors the noise and the constant hum of helicopter. Rotors outside drew them out of their classrooms, even though the most cynical professors who had witnessed everything throughout their decades of teaching stood in doorways with expressions of wonder and interest. This was amazing, unheard of it, was the sort of occasion that would be discussed for years to come. Through the Zoe could see more military troops coming out of the chopper via the windows that lined the main corridor. They relocated with the well-coordinated effectiveness of those used to formality and ceremony. A tiny group of soldiers sampled. On the football pitch, their dress suits spotless in spite of the wind. From the rotors that were still spinning, Madison and her companions trailed behind. The self-assured queens are no longer there, of the school, but doubtful witnesses to an incomprehensible phenomenon. A mounting sense of dread had replaced their earlier derision. A recognition that they might have made awful error. The girl they had written off as attention-seeking was making her way to a military conference. The consequences of the fact that officials had arrived by helicopter were starting to make sense to them. "What do you suppose is going on?" Madison heard Brittany whisper, her voice low and not sure. Madison remained silent. She was unable to respond. For the first time she was totally out of her element during her time in high school. Seeing things happen that she couldn't comprehension or command. Moments earlier, the social order had seemed so significant, but now it felt insignificant and pointless in comparison to whatever was taking place on the football pitch. Dawn. Zoe got closer to the main office, and through the glass, she could see Colonel Mitchell, standing erect and wearing her formal uniform with dignity. Here in her was the woman who had witnessed Zoe's darkest hour in life, holding something that would alter everything once more in high school. The whole school had assembled on the football pitch in a scenario that went against all of Lincoln High's policies and procedures, never created. What began as inquisitive pupils leaving classrooms in secret had turned into a mass departure as educators, officials, and even cafeteria staff attended the historic gathering. The Black Hawk, the 50-yard line, the helicopter sat like a sleeping giant. At last, its rotor still. But its existence demanded complete focus from the almost 2,000 individuals, who now made up a huju circling the aircraft principal in a semicircle. Beside Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Williams stood apprehensively, his typical in the presence of the distinguished military officer, whose chest was adorned with medals and ribbons that mentioned decades of sacrifice and dedication. The silver hair of the Colonel Wassender, her dress cap, done back in a conventional bun, and she exuded the quiet assurance that came with from commanding troops. Through impossibilities, Zoe came out of the school with two people on either side of her, the polished shoes of junior officers, clicked in perfect time with the concrete sidewalk leading Tuthfield. Like a living curtain, the crowd parted in front of them. Hundreds of faces looking from curiosity to amazement to dawning understanding, they turned to follow her movements. The young woman Woe, just hours before, had been derided and reviled, now walked with the dignitaf, someone receiving the greatest honors while being escorted. Madison Torres' face was frozen as she stood close to the stands, pale as she observed the parade. "Call your daddy to come," she had said cruelly in the cafeteria. "Save you" reverberated like a curse in her head. Tyler Brooks stood next to her, looking as if he might pass out. His previous jokes about airstrikes and explosives now appear not only unsuitable, but their brutality could be catastrophic. As Zoe got closer to her voice, Colonel Mitchell moved forward, carrying loudly through a handheld microphone that one of her assistants had set up in a flash across the quiet field. Though when she spoke, the sound system came to life, and her words could be heard everywhere of the gathered people. "Ladies and gentlemen, Lincoln High School instructors and students," she started speaking, steadfast and dominant. "Today, October 15th, 3 years ago, Staff Sergeant in Afghanistan, David Chen, gave his life in defense of his nation. He lost his life rescuing 12 members of his squad when they were ambushed outside of Kandahar with their convoy." A collective exclamation shook the throng as the gravity of the situation started to set in. This was neither a demonstration, nor a drill, or a course of study of some sort. This was genuine, intimate, and devastating in ways that were unfamiliar to the majority of these teens. Colonel Mitchell went on, her voice becoming more forceful as she described a man she had obviously admired and respected. Sergeant Chen was a hero, a father, and a communication expert who put the lives of his comrades over his personal security. He left the relative behind as the caravan was heavily fired upon, the security of his armored car to communicate. A link that would save his stranded friends. He was murdered by sniper fire while carrying out the task, yet he saved the lives of 12 people. Zoe stood alert, beside the colonel. She listened to the story she knew by heart, but had never heard before, tears running down her cheeks, told to an audience like that. The dog tags belonging to her father were heavy on her chest. Moreover, the baggy outfit that had appeared so ungainly the previous morning felt like armor, shielding her from the combined weight of all the stairs. Zoe, his daughter, the colonel indicated, has worn his uniform in remembrance of her each year on this date. His legacy has been carried on by her. Silent dignity, never aiming for praise or acknowledgement, but recalling a father who gave his life for a cause bigger than himself. The quiet on the field was now complete, interrupted only by the distant noise of vehicles and the sporadic sneeze from a crowd member. Even the most pessimistic elderly people, those who took pleasure in their ability to be too cool to care about anything, were enthralled with the event as it was taking place. One of her assistants held open a wooden presentation case, which Colonel Mitchell reached into. Then she pulled the American flag, with its flawless red, white, and blue fabric, in a smaller wooden container that appeared to sparkle in the midday sun. "We're here today to provide Zoe 2 things that have been missing for a while." The colonel said he was coming. This flag was the first to fly over the forward operations base, the site of her father's death. It was lowered. He has been waiting for the appropriate time to be introduced to his family and has been honored by half of the staff. She positioned the flag, which was somehow both lighter and heavier than Zoe had anticipated, in her shaking hands. The cloth was strong yet soft, and she could almost sense its past, carried the sacrifices it stood for, and the lives it represented. Secondly, a metal that caught the sunshine and appeared to radiate its own light was revealed when Colonel Mitchell opened the wooden box. Interior illumination. The highest military honor in our country, the Medal of Honor, it was given to employees posthumously. For his exceptional bravery and selflessness, Sergeant David Chen sacrifice. Though it wasn't the carefree clapping of a school assembly, the audience erupted in spontaneous applause. This was a more profound, respectful, and reserved kind of applauding, for moments that went beyond everyday life. Pupils who had never considered it found themselves wiping away their tears to serve in the military. Additionally, educators who had witnessed decades of graduations and ceremonies marveled at something never seen before as Colonel Mitchell the medal was affixed to Zoe's father's clothing. She leaned in and said something in a whisper that only Zoe could hear. "He would be quite proud of the woman you have grown into. His bravery endures in you." A minute of quiet that seemed to last forever marked the end of the service. 2,000 people standing collectively in remembrance of a guy who, until that day, the most of them had never heard of. The enchantment was broken after it was over. However, the climate at Lincoln High School had undergone a profound shift. Tyler, as the crowd started to thin out, Brooks was the first to go up to Zoe. His voice trembled as he spoke, and tears were streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry." His words were scarcely audible when he mumbled them. Your dad. He was an actual hero. I had no idea. I sincerely apologize for what I said and done. Zoe glanced, looking at him for a while, seeing instead the class clown, who had been torturing her. But a 17-year-old boy who had recently gained a deep understanding of respect and consequences. Simply, he was, she said. You now understand my motivation for wearing this attire? To remind people that heroes exist, not for recognition, and they may be closer than you believe at times. Addison came next. Her typical confidence was totally destroyed. The girl who had dominated the social scene at school, the casually brutal hierarchy, now appeared small and disoriented. I started then. Zoe paused, as if unable to find the right words for the situation. Dreadful, I said. Information about your dad. I had no idea. Zoe said. You didn't ask. But there was only a gentle melancholy in the voice, not fury. You noticed a change in someone and thought they were a target because of that. Perhaps the next time, before you choose to harm someone, you'll consider what you don't know. Someone. The helicopter's rotors were whirling up once as it was ready to take off. Once more, pupils started to realize that they had seen something that might remain with them throughout their lifetimes. The camouflaged girl was no longer the object of jeering, but a reminder that there are heroes in the real world, that everyone has a story to tell, and that occasionally those we overlook or reject have ties to something far higher than high. Hierarchies in schools. Zoe was standing in the field, grasping her father's Medal of Honor and sensing his presence long after the Black Hawk had vanished into the afternoon. Sky presence, more intensely than she had experienced since the day of his death. All around her, she was aware that Lincoln High School had been permanently altered, and that the next time she donned his uniform, and it would be with that, had always been deserving of respect and compassion. The tale would go beyond the school outside. The town serves as a reminder that children of heroes roam among us, quietly upholding their parents' legacy until the time comes for let that legacy shine.